Hi, welcome to this ABR Verdict of the Yamaha Tracer 9 GT. If you like what you see, please do hit the subscribe button below. Whenever I think about a bike I've enjoyed riding, usually one thing comes to mind straight away, and that's the sound a bike makes. Whether it's the throaty roar of an Africa Twin under acceleration, or it's the excitable bark of an R1250 GS when you hit the starter switch, the sound a bike makes really does have a big impact on how much I enjoy the ride. So when I sat down to sum up my thoughts after riding the Yamaha Tracer 9 GT for 12 months, it was no surprise that the sound came to mind. And by sound, I mean the high-pitched howl that comes out of that 890cc triple engine, which sounds like a starship going into warp drive. But as well as enjoying hearing the bike scream over the past year, how did it perform? This is the ABR Verdict. Over the past few months in particular, I have been riding the Tracer 9 GT on a 60-mile round trip from home to the office every day. My commute involves narrow country lanes, fast A roads, and a fair bit of congestion as well. And the Tracer has proved an exceptionally capable commuting bike for three main reasons. Now, the first one is whenever I'm commuting, particularly through traffic, I want to be able to see what's going on ahead of me, the traffic carnage. The Tracer 9 has a nice upright seating position, which means I can see whether I'm filtering through lines of traffic or if I'm looking around trying to do an overtake. So that's thumbs up from me on that. Secondly is the smooth throttle response and this silky smooth triple engine, which makes slow speed maneuvers incredibly relaxed. It's not snatchy. I never feel like the bike's going to get away from me. So being able to kind of meander through lines of traffic and just do some slow speed stuff is just easy to do on this bike. And well, thirdly, that engine is also pretty darn powerful. There's more than enough poking there to do high-speed overtakes and cruise along A roads at 70 miles an hour plus. So overall, as a commuter, it's performed very, very well. A couple of little things I quite like about it as well. Cornering lights. Now, I've done a lot of my commuting in the winter. I live in the middle of the countryside, in the middle of nowhere, and having these corner lights light up the narrow country lanes has proved a really good safety feature. Also, that something's proved handy is this luggage will fit a large full-face helmet in, just about, but it does fit. So when I'm coming home from work, I'm stopping at the supermarket to pick up some dinner, I can pop the helmet in, go and shop, come back out, put in my chicken jalfrezi and pop my helmet on. It's just little things like that that make life a bit easier. Any niggles while I've been commuting? Well, probably the main one for me is this split TFT screen. Now, I do quite enjoy it when a manufacturer tries to do something a little bit different, but in actual fact, I have found that the majority of the information I need is on the left-hand screen in a relatively small font, and the stuff on the right I don't use too often. Now, you can personalize it, but despite that, I've still found it a bit of a problem. So you do get used to it, but I would prefer to see one large TFT display on the bike. The Tracer 9 GT was made with weekend touring and Sunday rides in mind. Whether it's narrow country roads or hairpin turns on mountain passes, the Tracer is a willing accomplice. Now, Yamaha has been able to put 17-inch wheels front and rear on this bike because it's a sports tourer. And that means that the handling is a bit sharper than the adventure bikes with larger wheels that we tend to ride here at ABR more often. And that handling is light, it's agile, but it's also predictable, which is great for throwing into country lanes and generally acting like a little bit of a hooligan, which I tend to do on weekends when the mood takes me. Elsewhere, there's a raft of rider aids on here. You've got an excellent quick shifter which snicks up and down the gears crisply. There's also lean sensitive rider aids, and there's a selection of rider modes, all to enhance the ride and increase safety. Luggage for weekends away, well, there's more than enough for me and my wife in this luggage for a weekend in the Cotswolds, and the riding position is, for a day or so, pretty darn comfortable. It's nice and upright, and it just feels, yeah, it feels good for even after a couple of hours in the saddle. The Tracer 9 GT doesn't really have any off-road pretensions. Those 17-inch wheels aren't great for dirt, sand and mud, and it's actually a relatively heavy bike at 220 kilograms. That said, I have taken it on a couple of light trails, but these are really light gravel roads, and in reality, I wouldn't want to do much more than that. The Tracer 9 GT is a well-equipped long-distance tour. Triple engine, has more than enough power for high-speed cruising and high-speed overtakes. There's also very little vibration that comes from it, so even after a few hours in the saddle, you haven't got any fatigue from vibes going through the pegs and the bars. Now that comfort is also enhanced by the KYB semi-active suspension, which smooths out the lumps and bumps of the road very well. There are a couple of different settings you can choose for it, which either stiffens up the suspension or smooths it out. To be honest with you, I didn't actually find too much difference between the settings, but it's nice being able to tailor it to the type of riding you want to do. Talking of comfort, there's also plenty of weather protection on the bike, mainly from this very large screen, which is adjustable with one hand, which is good to see. It's not the lightest mechanism, but I did figure out how to do it while riding along, and it's just good to see that you have adjustability from the saddle. It just feels planted and stable at high speeds. It really is at home on the motorway. And again, the luggage. For a weekend away, there's plenty in there. If I'm packing for 2 people over a couple of weeks, it is a little bit of a squeeze, so I probably want to get a bag on the back as well. Now the Tracer has an 18-litre fuel tank, which I've found has got me between 160 and 180 miles between fill-ups, depending on how long my fuel anxiety will let me keep the low fuel light on. It's a decent distance. It's not a huge distance. I would say fine for weekends away or for a week or 2 in Western Europe. If you are travelling further afield where fuel isn't more commonplace, I don't know, I might want a longer range, but in reality, you know, this is a bike that's mainly going to be used for UK rides and trips to the Alps and the Pyrenees and things like that. And for those trips, perfectly adequate. One thing to bear in mind if you are looking at this bike and thinking of covering long distances is that seating position again. Now, as I said, it is upright, it is comfortable, and the seat is actually very comfortable, but over long periods, the leg bend angle is a little more acute than you might find on a dedicated touring bike or even an adventure bike. Comfortable enough for an hour and a half, a couple of hours, but I did find myself stretching my legs relatively often and stopping to have a break a little more often than I would, say, on a BMW RT or even a Honda Africa Twin. One thing to bear in mind is that the Tracer 9 GT is chain driven. Now, some dedicated long distance tourers swear by shaft drives because of the ease of maintenance or lack of maintenance needed. Personally, I don't mind too much lubing up my chain every 300-400 miles, but it's something to bear in mind if you are heading off on tour. Whenever I think about a bike to take around the world, I tend to think about off-road ability. Chances are you're going to hit some pretty rugged roads, and you also might want to go off-piste completely. With this in mind, a road-focused sports tourer might not be the best choice. But if your trip of a lifetime involves sticking to smoother surfaces, well then there's no reason why the Tracer 9 GT couldn't spirit you around the world. But one thing to bear in mind, if you do want to take a Yamaha on your big trip, then I'd highly recommend checking out the Tenere 700 World Raid. Now that bike's got on and off-road ability written all over it. Now, I don't like riding Pillion on motorbikes, I'm going to admit that right now. There's something about not being in control that just freaks me out a little bit. But if you are a regular Pillion rider, then the Tracer 9 GT will treat you well. There's a nice big wide padded seat, the grab rails are chunky so there's plenty to get hold of, and the foot pegs have been put in, you know, pretty sensible position. If you have got bigger feet, then you might find your heel hitting the luggage if you do use the luggage while you ride the bike, but other than that, it's a pretty decent position. And my wife has actually become a bit of a connoisseur of Pillion perches on bikes over the years, and her feedback was a thumbs up. Even after a couple of hours in the saddle, she said she was still feeling pretty comfy. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time on the Tracer 9 GT over the past year. It's proved a fun, engaging and reliable bike to ride. You know, I've had no mechanical problems at all. It's also proved relatively frugal, averaging about 52 miles per gallon. And at £12,202, I think the Tracer is actually a bit of a bargain. You know, not only do you get a bike that's a lot of fun to ride, you also get things like heated grips, cruise control, semi-active suspension, various rider modes. It all adds up to a bike that provides a lot of bang for your buck, one that I would happily have in my garage. If you'd like to see Yamaha's full lineup of adventure and touring bikes, then make sure you get yourself along to the Adventure Bike Rider Festival 2022, which takes place on the 24th to the 26th of June at the magnificent Ragley Hall Estate in Warwickshire. Head over to www.abrfestival.com to get your tickets.